47 when he finally allowed himself to speak, not with scandal, not with confession, but with a sentence that held the weight of tenderness. She didn't cry, but I could hear the sadness in every note. Benjamin Biolay had remained silent for years. His name whispered in connection with Vanessa Paradis only through shadows of speculation. But when he spoke at last, the tone was neither defensive nor proud. It was soft, like someone recalling a storm that had passed but still lingered in the scent of rain. It was 2013. Vanessa Paradis had just emerged from the ruins of a 14-year love story with Johnny Depp, a love so mythic it had become part of her identity. The breakup wasn't noisy. It was a quiet implosion, the kind that leaves the world intact but tears a person apart from within. And in that fragile silence, she walked into a Paris recording studio, small, dimly lit, the kind of place where people go to speak without words. Benjamin Biolay was already there, sitting by the piano, cigarette unlit between his fingers. He was known as the melancholy prince of French music, a man whose lyrics often sounded like therapy sessions for ghosts. When Vanessa arrived, she didn't have to say anything. He heard everything in her silence. The click of her heels, the pause before the first note, all of it spoke of loss, resilience, and the faint pulse of something wanting to live again. In that room, two wounded musicians didn't fall in love. They built a refuge, a space where pain could turn into sound, and where survival could be sung. Reporters would later ask, were they lovers? But the truth was more delicate, more dangerous to define. Perhaps Benjamin didn't come to claim her heart. Perhaps he came to help her remember it. And in the echo of those songs, one question remains, suspended, unanswered. When someone helps us heal, do we owe them love or gratitude? For more than 2 decades, Vanessa Paradis had lived inside a golden frame, the girl who sang Joe Le Taxi at 14, the muse of Chanel, the woman who tamed Johnny Depp. To the public, she seemed untouched by time or tragedy. Her beauty carried the serenity of someone who had already found everything worth having: love, fame, children, and artistic freedom. She was, as French magazines love to say, l'éternelle discrète, the eternal woman of grace and silence. Yet grace can also be a mask. Behind every photograph of her faint smile, there was exhaustion, the quiet ache of someone trying to hold together a life that was already splitting at its seams. When her relationship with Depp ended, the headlines called it an amicable separation, but no such thing truly exists. A 14-year love doesn't fade politely, it collapses in slow motion, leaving behind echoes in the corridors of the heart. For Vanessa, silence became survival. She didn't speak to the press, didn't answer questions about betrayal or distance. She retreated to what had always been her true home music. But this time, the music had to be different. It couldn't be about youth or glamour. It had to sound like recovery. That's when Benjamin Biolay appeared, or perhaps reappeared. From the same invisible world of artists who understand sadness as a second language. Biolay was not a stranger to emotional wreckage. His own life had been a catalog of heartbreaks and controversies. But he had a gift, the ability to listen without judgment. When the record label suggested him as a collaborator for Vanessa's next album, Love Songs, it seemed a professional choice. Yet, from the first meeting, there was something almost cinematic about their encounter, two people carrying invisible bruises, drawn together by the possibility of creating beauty out of damage. In the studio, he didn't ask her to talk about Depp. Instead, he asked her to sing as if she were writing a letter to herself. The first song they worked on, Love Song, was simple, almost childlike. But within its melody hid a confession that love, once lost, can be remembered in fragments, never in full. Biolay sat at the piano while Vanessa stood by the microphone, her voice trembling on the first take. The engineer later said that he had to turn down the recording levels, not because she sang too loud, but because the emotion cracked through her notes like lightning through glass. Biolay watched, silent. When she finished, he said only, again, but softer, as if you're forgiving yourself. That became the guiding spirit of the entire album. Each track was a step tentative, hesitant, luminous toward the rediscovery of identity. Songs like Les Espaces et Les Sentiments and New Year carried echoes of both their souls, hers fragile but steady, his grounding but melancholic. Together, they crafted something that sounded like the quiet aftermath of a storm, not destruction, but renewal. Outside the studio, rumors began to bloom. Paris tabloids speculated about La Nouvelle Romance de Paradis. The idea was irresistible. Two of France's most magnetic musicians, united in the ashes of heartbreak. But those who truly watched them saw something else, a tenderness without possession. Biolay never touched her in public. They never posed as a couple. Yet there was an intimacy in the way they looked at each other, as if words had already failed them long ago. To her fans, Vanessa seemed transformed. Her style softened. Her interviews, rare as they were, carried a calm tone. "I sing what I live," she told Le Monde. "And sometimes, I live what I sing." It was the closest she ever came to acknowledging how art had replaced confession. Biolay became her shadow, her mirror, her echo. He composed, produced, and quietly stepped back into the darkness once each song was complete. But every sound bore his fingerprint, the minor chords, the melancholy violins, the pauses that allowed pain to breathe. What few people understood was that Love Songs wasn't just an album, it was an exorcism. For Vanessa, every verse was a goodbye to the man she once loved, to the image the world demanded she keep, and perhaps to the version of herself who had forgotten how to be alone. And for Benjamin, it was something different, a redemption. Through her voice, he found his own healing too. He once told a friend, "She sings like someone who is lost and forgiven at the same time." They spent months together in that studio. Mornings began with silence. Evenings ended with silence. Between those silences, they built an entire emotional architecture, fragile, invisible, yet indestructible in its sincerity. When the album was released, critics hailed it as Vanessa's Rebirth. It went platinum, won awards, and reintroduced her to the public not as Johnny Depp's former partner, but as an artist who had turned heartbreak into harmony. But success, even gentle success, always carries a shadow. In photos from that period, she looks luminous, but her eyes seem to be searching for something off camera. Biolay stands beside her, often slightly turned away, as if knowing that his place in her story would never be center stage. And perhaps that was exactly how it was meant to be, because in a world obsessed with possession, their connection remained an act of release, a bond that refused to name itself, a melody that refused to end. For those who only saw the surface, Love Songs was a comeback. For those who listened closely, it was a love letter to silence. And deep inside that silence, something or someone was slowly learning how to breathe again. Healing is rarely beautiful at first. It is awkward, unfinished, full of pauses that sound like fear. In the months following the release of Love Songs, Vanessa Paradis didn't appear triumphant. She appeared quieter, as if fame had finally lost its taste and she was learning to live without the constant noise. Those who met her during that period described her as calm. But the kind of calm that comes after surviving a shipwreck, she was standing on the shore, drenched, breathing, unsure what to do next. Benjamin Biolay, meanwhile, became both her anchor and her echo. They were not a couple, not in the conventional sense, but they shared something that often runs deeper than love complicity, the kind that allows two souls to recognize each other's wounds without needing to name them. When Vanessa arrived at the studio, she would sit beside him at the piano, sometimes for hours, without speaking. He would play fragments of melodies, minor keys, unfinished phrases, and she would hum, softly, almost to herself. It was in those fragile moments that love songs truly took shape, not as an album, but as a diary of invisible emotions. The sound engineer later confessed, "I never saw them touch, but I felt something pass between them, a kind of invisible current, like electricity made of empathy." For Vanessa, Benjamin became a mirror she could finally trust. With Johnny, she had been part of a myth, the French muse and the American outlaw, the delicate and the wild. With Benjamin, she could be human again. No cameras, no mythology, just two people whispering their sadness into microphones. Sometimes, during recording breaks, she would lean against the wall, close her eyes, and listen to him improvise on the piano. His music was slow, patient, and slightly broken, like the rhythm of someone learning to breathe again. One evening, as the lights dimmed, she whispered, "You play like someone who's afraid to wake a sleeping heart." He smiled without looking up. "Maybe I am," he replied. That was their language, not confessions, but exchanges of tenderness disguised as music. Outside, gossip continued. Magazines speculated that they were lovers, that Benjamin had replaced Depp, that Vanessa was finally in love again. She ignored all of it, because she knew, and perhaps Benjamin knew too, that what existed between them could not survive the light. It was not meant to be labeled, photographed, or explained. It existed only in the private frequency of creation. But even art cannot escape emotion forever. During one late-night session, Benjamin played a melody that would become Les Espaces et les Sentiments. It was fragile, almost translucent. Vanessa began to sing, but halfway through, her voice broke. Not from exhaustion, but from memory. She turned away from the microphone, tears unfallen but visible in her voice. Benjamin didn't move toward her. He simply stopped playing and waited. After a moment, she whispered, "It still hurts." He answered, "Good. That means it's real." From that night on, the sessions changed. The music grew warmer, less careful. The pain was still there, but it no longer dominated. It became texture, something to build upon, not to drown in. In those months, something remarkable happened. Vanessa began to smile again, not for the cameras, but in small, unguarded ways. She laughed at his clumsy jokes, brought coffee to the studio, hummed melodies on her way out. Her friends noticed the shift. She wasn't in love. One of them said later, she was alive. The transformation was subtle but profound. Through Benjamin's presence, she rediscovered not passion, but peace, the kind that arrives when someone accepts your silence instead of trying to fill it. Benjamin understood that, perhaps too well. He was a man who had lived through his own storms. who had watched love turn into rumor and intimacy into spectacle. He knew the cost of visibility, so he chose the opposite, invisibility. He stood beside her but never in front. When asked about their relationship, he deflected, saying only, "We made music." And music is already a kind of love. Behind that modesty was a truth he never said aloud, that sometimes, to love someone broken, you must not touch them. You must give them space to remember how it feels to stand without leaning. When Love Songs was released, the world heard beauty. But Benjamin and Vanessa heard ghosts, the echo of all that had been lost and all that had quietly survived. The album wasn't just a soundtrack to healing, it was healing itself, pressed into vinyl grooves, replayed again and again like a heartbeat rediscovered. Yet healing, too, has its shadows. The more she healed, the further she drifted from the man who helped her do it. When the album tour began, their paths started to diverge. Benjamin returned to his solo work. Vanessa went on stage alone. Their collaboration had served its purpose. The refuge they built together began to fade, like a dream that dissolves with daylight. But certain moments refused to vanish. In one of her last interviews about the album, she was asked if Benjamin had been important in that chapter of her life. She smiled. That faint Paradis smile, equal parts mystery and melancholy. "He helped me breathe again," she said, "and that's enough." In another corner of Paris, Benjamin was asked the same question. His answer was simpler, but carried the same ache. "I wasn't the man she loved. I was the man who understood her silence." Perhaps that was the hidden truth of their story, that love doesn't always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes, it wears the face of patience. Sometimes, it speaks through melody instead of words. And sometimes, it leaves quietly once its work is done. When Vanessa sang Tu vois le monde en couleurs, she wasn't describing a man, she was describing a feeling, the moment light returns after darkness. The warmth of a presence that expects nothing. Those who listened carefully could hear it, the gratitude hidden beneath every note, the unspoken farewell wrapped inside each lyric. Love Songs was never about Benjamin, or Johnny, or even love itself. It was about survival, about finding beauty in the wreckage and forgiving the past for existing. In the end, what they shared was not romance, but recognition. Two souls who had learned that not every connection must last forever to be true. Some simply appear, like a song that enters your life, changes its rhythm, and then fades, leaving you quieter, stronger, and strangely whole. For years, the story of Vanessa Paradis and Benjamin Biolay was treated as a whisper, half romance, half riddle. But the true revelation came not in scandal or confession, but in the quietest form imaginable, honesty. When Benjamin finally spoke publicly about that time, his words dismantled everything people thought they knew. "I wasn't her lover," he said softly during a late-night interview. "I was her listener. That was my role. That was enough." In a world addicted to labels, his simplicity was shocking. He wasn't denying affection, he was redefining it. The press wanted drama, a forbidden liaison, another chapter in the mythology of broken stars. What they got instead was something disarmingly human, a man admitting that love can exist without possession. He described their time together not as a relationship, but as a conversation made of silences. In those silences, he said, he learned what grief sounds like when it starts to heal. "She didn't cry," he repeated, "but her voice did." Those words reframed everything. The late-night recording sessions, The long pauses between songs. The unspoken connection, they were not preludes to romance. They were rituals of recovery. Benjamin hadn't fallen in love with Vanessa Paradis. He had fallen in love with the way she transformed pain into melody. And she, in turn, had loved the way he allowed her to do so without interruption. It was, perhaps, the purest kind of intimacy, one that never demanded proof. The greatest shock, then, wasn't that they weren't lovers. It was that the world had mistaken healing for seduction. The refuge they built was never meant for desire. It was built for resurrection. Years later, when asked if she had ever loved him, Vanessa paused, as if searching for the right word. "Love?" she said. "Yes, but not the kind you write songs about. The kind that saves you before you disappear." Those who heard it understood there had been love, but not the love people wanted to see. It was the kind that doesn't photograph well quiet, mutual, unfinished. And perhaps that's what made it sacred. There's a moment in the documentary about the making of love songs, one that fans often overlook. The camera pans across the studio late at night. Benjamin sits by the piano, head bowed, cigarette burning out beside him. Vanessa stands behind the microphone, eyes closed, whispering the lyrics to Mi Amor. When the song ends, she doesn't speak. She simply places her hand over her heart, nods toward him, and leaves the room. That gesture, brief and wordless, says everything the tabloids never could. For Benjamin, it was the end of something beautiful, a chapter written in silence and sealed in gratitude. After her, he later told a friend, "I couldn't listen to anyone sing without hearing her breath." And for Vanessa, it was the beginning of freedom. Love songs became her way of saying goodbye not only to Johnny Depp, but to the woman she had been with him, the muse, the mystery, the eternal partner. Through Benjamin, she rediscovered herself as an artist, not an accessory to someone else's legend. That was the revelation hidden beneath the music, that the most transformative relationships are not always romantic. Some are bridges built to help us cross the river of loss and find the shore again. Benjamin Biolay didn't come to replace Johnny Depp. He came to repair what fame and heartbreak had broken. And when his task was done, he left quietly, like a man leaving a room where someone has just learned to breathe. Years later, when they crossed paths at an award ceremony, they greeted each other with the same kind of look they had shared in the studio, gentle, grateful, slightly distant. No lingering touch, no nostalgia. Just a silent acknowledgement of what had been and what no one else would ever fully understand. The world saw absence. They knew it was completion. And perhaps the greatest shock of all is this: not every love story ends when two people part. Some end the moment one heart learns to beat on its own again. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. Years after love songs, both Vanessa Paradis and Benjamin Biolay continued to create, to love, to live separately, but forever linked by the chapter they wrote in silence. Their names still appear together in articles, whispered as if there must have been something more. But perhaps the most beautiful truth is that there wasn't. Because what they shared was rarer than romance, compassion without expectation. It was the kind of love that doesn't seek to possess or conquer, but to restore. When Vanessa sang again, it wasn't to prove that she had moved on, it was to prove that she had survived. And somewhere in that survival was Benjamin's quiet contribution, a piano, a melody, a man who knew how to listen when words failed. In a world where stories are measured by passion, they offered something gentler, the possibility that tenderness alone can save a soul. Their connection reminds us that not every encounter is meant to last. Some are meant to repair. Every person carries a storm within them. Some are fortunate enough to meet someone who arrives, not to stay, but to help clear the sky. Benjamin was that for Vanessa, not the love of her life, but the peace that followed it. And that is the paradox of healing. The ones who save us rarely stay to enjoy the calm they helped create. They step back, leaving behind only the faint echo of a song, the sound of someone learning to live again. As the lights of the studio fade in memory, one can still imagine the last chord of love songs lingering in the air, neither joyful nor sad. Simply true. It was not a declaration of love, but a quiet thank you from one broken heart to another. Because sometimes, love doesn't mean staying. Sometimes, it means knowing when to leave and leaving behind a song that never stops playing.